Welcome to the deep dive, where we don't just scratch the surface. We chase the shadows of truth and expose the history the mainstream ignores. I have the files spread out tonight, and we are cracking open a subject so dark, so consistently dismissed, it's often relegated to the realm of cinematic fiction or, outright mass delusion, the world of organized cult and ritual abuse.
It really is the third rail, isn't it? For
Right.
modern journalism, psychology, there's a reason.
Mhm.
But when you strip away the layers of denial and you actually listen to the thousands of survivors, people across different countries, different continents, decades apart, all telling the exact same terrifying narrative, detailing the same symbols, the same methods, the same terrifying philosophies, it just stops being fantasy. It really starts sounding like a horrifyingly organized, long-run conspiracy, one involving elite complicity that has, persisted across centuries.
Right. So our mission tonight is to move past the sensationalism and systematically decode the dark technology of coercive mind control that allows these groups to operate silently. We need to unmask the ideological architects behind ritual trauma and understand not only what happened, but the philosophical justification used by the perpetrators to commit these acts, which, we've documented in our source material from treating professionals.
Exactly. And for those following along, we are connecting the dots between ancient occult history and, well, modern clinical reports. We're going to distill three core, indispensable truths from this often suppressed evidence. Pieces of knowledge that, frankly, change the way you view the power structure of the world.
Okay, first, we're going to dissect the ancient occult symbols that are hiding in plain sight. Not as simple architectural oddities, no, but as sophisticated, weaponized psychological triggers used to induce trance states in victims.
And second, we'll spend crucial time exposing the exact clinical mechanism used to program victims. We'll detail the horrifying command phrases, like the deceptively simple words, deeper and deeper, and explain how they induce immediate, involuntary dissociation and total compliance. This is the technology of mind control, basically weaponized against the psyche.
And finally, we will explore the documented trail of powerful groups, from the highest ranks of historical aristocracy and secret societies like the Freemasons, all the way through to modern intelligence operations that have allegedly perpetuated these cycles of abuse and, maybe more distressingly, use their institutional power to orchestrate systemic cover-ups.
Tonight, we're turning on the lights in the darkest corners of history. We encourage you to follow @officialurbanus on X for live threads dissecting this evidence and, joining the conversation.
Okay, let's unpack this hidden history then. To understand the organization of ritual abuse, you have to recognize that this is not random. It's a deliberate ideological lineage, the timeline of what some call the hidden hand. Our sources start us in 1979, England, near a U.S. Air Force base, specifically mentioning the ancient site of Bury St. Edmunds. This area is, it's steeped in medieval religious history, yet it holds a strange clue.
Yeah, the location is a perfect example of historical inversion. The Abbey Gate at Bury St. Edmunds, the sacred burial ground of King Edmunds, it features twin hexagrams, symbols that today are widely associated with the Star of David. But our sources make a critical distinction here. They point out that this symbol wasn't really in common use for Judaism until much later. Historically, when the Abbey Gate was constructed, the hexagram was primarily known as a potent occult symbol, deeply embedded in the secretive Gnostic and Hermetic knowledge structures of that era.
So it's a symbol of occult power, then, intentionally woven right into the architecture of traditional religious authority, suggesting that the ideology of secrecy and occult practice existed at the highest levels of power long, long before the modern era.
Precisely. It's evidence that the architecture itself was a kind of map of power that included hidden, secretive knowledge. But symbols are just iconography, right? The real engine driving this dark tradition is philosophical.
Yeah.
The Gnostic worldview. This is the core ideological conspiracy.
Okay, so to truly understand the mindset of the, let's say, high-ranking cultist, you have to understand the shocking Gnostic reversal they embrace. Orthodoxy views the God of Israel as the benevolent creator and the serpent in Genesis as the agent of evil Satan. How does Gnosticism flip that? How do they justify their actions?
Well, Gnosticism flips the narrative entirely on its head, and this is absolutely crucial for understanding the perpetrator's sense of justification. They believe that the God of Israel, whom they call the Demiurge, is actually the flawed, inferior, and often malevolent creator of the material world. They see the material world itself as a kind of prison built by this flawed deity.
And the human spirit trapped inside this flawed body.
Right. The human spirit, according to Gnostics, is a pure spark of the ultimate true God, tragically trapped within this inferior material body built by the Demiurge. Now, here's the inversion. The serpent, which tempted Eve in Genesis, is viewed as the benevolent, wise being who brought desperately needed knowledge. The knowledge of good and evil, the light of Lucifer, you could say, to trapped humanity.
So by their logic, the traditional Christian God is satanic, essentially, and their reverence for the serpent, the light bringer, is virtuous because it seeks to liberate that trapped divine spark. Our sources confirm this, right? Citing Gnostic treatises like The Testimony of Truth, which praises the serpent for persuading Eve so that the eyes of your mind will be opened.
Yes, and this creates the psychological justification for cruelty. If the physical world, the body, and the life experiences within it are inherently flawed and evil, then inflicting pain and suffering, which the cult leader experiences as a sense of power over life and death, is not sinful in their mind. It's part of a ritual path toward enlightenment or the supposed release of trapped soul particles.
But this philosophy directly feeds into modern Luciferianism, and we need to clarify this distinction, I think, because it's often confused with pure Satanism. Why is this nuance critical for the deep dive?
It's vital because Satanism generally involves pure rebellion against God and reverence for a strictly evil entity. Luciferianism, conversely, seeks to approach the ultimate true God, the entity beyond the demiurge, by embracing both the light side and the dark side, the good and the evil, the constructive and the destructive. They see Lucifer not as the devil, but as the Promethean light bringer, the force of rebellion against the flawed creation.
Okay, this duality explains the contradictory behavior reported by survivors in these cults. They weren't simply forced into dark rituals. Sometimes they were actively encouraged to attend church, excel in school, cultivate a public, highly functional part of their personality that is on the light side, while simultaneously being forced to participate in extreme rituals associated with the dark side.
They need both extremes. It's a synthesis. The cultist believes they must integrate the full spectrum of experience, profound suffering, and profound control to achieve gnosis, or ultimate secret knowledge, which they believe brings them closer to the ultimate deity. This makes the ritual trauma, paradoxically, a form of worship and control.
And these weren't merely abstract philosophical debates, were they? These philosophies were being actively preserved and practiced by the elite, which brings us to the documented ties between secret societies and the aristocracy, the true face of the hidden hand, maybe.
Let's look at the Hellfire Club, formerly known as the Friars of Medmenham. This was not some fringe gathering. It was a documented organization involving English aristocrats, high government officials, people close to the very center of power. Sir Francis Dashwood, who founded the Friars, was a powerful, connected figure. A personal friend and advisor to King George III, even served as the Chancellor of the Exchequer. This is the government itself, essentially, engaging in these practices.
And most famously for American listeners, Benjamin Franklin, a high-ranking Freemason in the American colonies, visited the Hellfire Club in 1758. What was the nature of their activities, and how does that link to the philosophical preservation?
Well, their activities were defined by organized libertinism, orgies, and what were described as black masses. The source material notes that the club's inner circle consisted of exactly 13 members, and their rituals involved blasphemous acts inverting religious symbols. Members dressing as monks, while the women participants dressed as nuns. This is the Gnostic principle of inversion made manifest in ritual practice.
Right. The significance here isn't just that they had wild parties. It's that they were performing organized, structured rituals designed to induce altered states and blasphemy possession states, or highly dissociated states, all based on an occult Gnostic worldview.
Absolutely. The connection is critical. Occult philosophy and organized rituals were practiced by the elite. The sources indicate that groups like the Freemasons, who have historically acted as repositories for Hermetic and Gnostic traditions suppressed by mainstream Christianity, helped to preserve and promote these ideas across centuries. The Hellfire Club shows that the elite weren't just preserving the ideas, they were actively practicing the rituals, setting a crucial historical foundation for the organized, systemic ritualistic abuse we see reported today.
The fact that these societies involve people at the highest levels of government and society who are also linked to institutions that preserve esoteric knowledge, well, it suggests a deep institutional penetration that goes back centuries. It's not just fringe cultists. It's an entrenched system of hidden knowledge and power.
And that system of secrecy is their primary shield. We see this historical pattern of obstruction repeated endlessly. Think about 17th century France, where police investigations into black masses involving aristocracy, specifically Madame de Montespan, the mistress of King Louis XIV, were abruptly terminated. And the evidence was ordered destroyed by the king himself. When the crime involves influential people, Secrecy and the destruction of evidence is the first priority of the system. Always.
Okay, that sets the terrifying historical stage. Now we pivot to the core revelations of how these cults operate today. This is the dark technology, the highly specialized technique they call programming.
Right, and we must first define our terms because these are clinical concepts. Programming is defined very specifically in our sources, derived from the work of treating clinicians. It is the systematic, intentional manipulation or traumatization of altered personalities, fragments, or other dissociated mental states, explicitly for the purpose of long-term mind control. It's the calculated creation of obedient, hidden identities within the victim's psyche.
And for our listeners, just to clarify, an alter personality is simply a part of the self-dissociated state, often carrying a specific memory set, skill set, or emotional experience that splits off from the main personality due to overwhelming trauma. It's the mind's mechanism for surviving the unsurvivable, basically.
Yes. Dissociation is a natural human defense mechanism. The abuser systematically exploits this mechanism by pairing extreme violence, pain, and life-threatening scenarios with specific cues. A textbook definition of advanced Pavlovian conditioning to force the person's mind to check out and create that alter personality. The trauma acts as the adhesive, bonding the cue to the dissociated state.
Okay, the case of the patient known as Karen is essential for understanding the sheer power and efficiency of this conditioning process. A standard hypnotist cannot force someone to violate their deepest values, but ritual abuse perpetrators do achieve that level of control because they use existential trauma to install those triggers.
The clinical observation of Karen is chilling, because it highlights the mechanical efficiency of the trigger. Karen was in a group therapy session with other survivors, discussing another case. The therapist, merely attempting to cross-validate information, casually spoke the phrase "deeper and deeper" during a conversation.
And what was the immediate involuntary reaction?
Karen, just hearing this phrase, immediately entered a visible, profound trance state. Her visible distress vanished, replaced by a deep, unnatural dissociation. What was terrifying was that others in the room who had undergone similar ritual abuse also visibly slumped or fell into a trance as well, showing the consistency of the programming across different victims. When Karen was individually accessed, a 4-year-old alter identity named Kathy was present.
And Kathy, the alter personality, explained the origin of those words.
Kathy recounted being tied down on a table in a dark, structured environment by people in black robes. Someone was cutting her arm with a razor blade, repeating the words "deeper and deeper and deeper" with each painful stroke, simultaneously instructing her mind to go deeper into the trance. She also reported that the same phrase was used during extreme sexual penetration. The words were perfectly paired with both excruciating pain and profound fear of annihilation.
So the phrase "deeper and deeper" isn't just an instruction, it became the direct Pavlovian command. Hear the phrase, and the mind immediately, involuntarily, dissociates into a pre-programmed trance state as an automatic reaction to overwhelming conditioned fear and pain.
This is the core operating system of the conspiracy. It ensures that the victim is not consciously choosing to participate or remember the abuse. Once accessed via the trigger, the alter personality, which is obedient, is trained to enact specific tasks while in a trance, often involving non-consensual sex, violence, or criminal acts. The sources emphasize that this mechanism makes ritual abuse a sophisticated way to make incest and exploitation safer for the predator because the victim is conditioned for total compliance and later amnesia.
And this terrifying efficiency ensures the secret is maintained, often through a highly coercive internal identity known as a spirit slave or enforcer alter.
Why is the enforcer alter so crucial to the cult's operational security? Well, the enforcer alter is commanded, often under torture, to carry out the cult leader's dictates, particularly those related to secrecy, including self-harm or even suicide if the host personality begins to recall memories or disclose the truth. Our sources detail how this concept is seen historically in shamanic practices and sorcery cults globally, where the goal was to acquire a familiar spirit. The modern enforcer alter is essentially a psychological familiar spirit, commanded via a cue to carry out a specific task, often without the host personality's conscious awareness.
Okay, that explains the clinically observed behavior, like the patient Annie who was observed chanting, "I've got to see blood, I've got to see blood," immediately before self-mutilating. The act of self-mutilation and the desire to see blood is often reported as a way to enforce cult rules like absolute secrecy or to simulate the blood rituals they were forced to observe or participate in.
It's the ultimate psychological guardrail against disclosure, absolutely.
Beyond auditory cues, they also use visual stimuli, the secret language of the hidden hand, maybe. This brings us back to the vaporwave aesthetic of occult symbols acting as triggers.
Simple shapes, colors,
Huh.
images. They can act as highly effective access points.
Well,
We have the striking example of patient Sharon. When asked to free associate with simple geometric shapes, circles, squares, triangles, her responses were pretty unremarkable. But when the therapist showed her a drawing of a five-pointed star, the pentagram, her immediate visceral association was simply and chillingly sex.
the pentagram, an ancient occult symbol functioning as a literal psychological trigger linked directly to specific trauma and compliance.
Exactly. The source confirms the pentagram has long been a key symbol used in ritual magic, and in the context of ritual abuse, it can function as a specific nonverbal access cue. Similarly, flashing lights, colored filters, illuminated images. These are frequently reported by survivors as accessing stimuli. Paired with trauma, these cues can immediately incapacitate the victim and induce the dissociated state. It's an ancient technology given a terrifyingly efficient modern application.
But inevitably, right, when these horrific stories surface, the entire mainstream narrative shifts to denial, claiming these are false memories. We absolutely must address the counter-narrative, primarily championed by the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, or FMSF.
Yeah, this is where the cover-up effort meets the clinical world head-on. The FMSF gained massive traction by claiming that therapists were actively brainwashing or implanting memories of abuse where none existed. Our sources are extremely critical of this organization, calling their foundational thesis absurd and unfounded.
But I have to ask the skeptical question that the listener is probably thinking. If the FMSF's claims are unfounded, why did they gain such massive traction in the media, the legal system, and among academic skeptics?
Because the FMSF was highly effective as an advocacy service, basically. Designed specifically to assist in the legal defense of alleged perpetrators, often affluent, high-status individuals. Their success was media-driven and legal, not scientific. Their data relies almost exclusively on testimonies from individuals who claim they were falsely accused. The perpetrators themselves, or their advocates, or from recanters.
And recantation, according to the sources, is not always evidence of a false memory, is it?
Far from it. Recanters are often prompted, controlled, or coerced by the perpetrators to deny the original claims, often through legal or financial pressure. Furthermore, the FMSF fails entirely to address the clinical possibility that the accused perpetrator might themselves have dissociative amnesia for their own crimes, a recognized phenomenon where abusers repress their own involvement, or, well, that they are simply lying to escape prosecution.
So it's an inversion, much like the Gnostic philosophy, where the accused perpetrator is more readily believed and protected than the victim who is supported by multiple treating clinicians.
Which brings us directly to the clinical consensus. Okay, let's initiate the Truth Meter segment, based on professional data derived from those who actually treat these survivors. We have to look at what the clinicians conclude after seeing the evidence firsthand.
Okay, let's define our terms for the meter. We are talking about SRA, which stands for Satanic Ritual Abuse. In a comprehensive 1995 survey of British psychologists who had seen clients reporting SRA, what was the consensus on the veracity of the claims?
The consensus was staggering, actually, and highly concerning for the official narrative. 80% of those treating professionals, the people who saw the raw clinical data, the scars, the trauma patterns, believed the allegations of SRA were credible. We also must cite the 1994 Goodman et al. Study of psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers in the U.S., who reported they overwhelmingly believed both the allegations of abuse and the allegations of ritual or religious elements of the abuse.
And the nature of the abuse described in those cases is consistently characterized as the most extreme and organized ever seen in clinical practice. This is where the extreme claims appear.
Absolutely. The data is consistent and horrific. Of the adult ritual abuse cases seen by professionals, 33% reported cannibalism, often symbolic, but sometimes literal consumption, and 28% reported baby breeding for the purpose of ritual sacrifice.
I have to pause here and just channel the skepticism of the audience for a second. How is that level of coordination, cannibalism, and baby breeding even possible to organize? And why would seasoned treating professionals believe such fantastic claims if there's rarely forensic evidence?
That is the essential critical question. The reason professionals believe it is due to two factors: consistency and trauma pattern distinction. Clinicians operate from the standard of the preponderance of evidence, which means if multiple patients coming from disparate backgrounds, geographies, without any prior knowledge of each other, present with the same extreme, consistent narrative detailing the same rituals, symbols, and abuse techniques, the clinician must conclude that the accounts have high clinical plausibility.
They are seeing a common blueprint of organized crime.
Precisely. Furthermore, the British study noted that among children who made disclosures, the alleged ritual abuses like sadistic acts, death threats, drug use, animal killings, cause significantly higher rates of sexual acting out, severe sleep problems, and chronic phobias compared to children who reported non-ritual sexual abuse. This is a trauma pattern that is measurably distinct and far more debilitating, suggesting a unique organized element to the abuse.
Therefore, based on the high consensus among treating professionals who see the victims, coupled with the extreme nature and internal consistency of the accounts, the clinical plausibility of ritual abuse allegations rates as high plausibility. The counter-narrative, often driven by vested interests like the FMSF, seems designed specifically to ignore this professional consensus.
And we see the institutional denial reflected everywhere. For instance, the Professional Diagnostic Manual, the DSM-IV, actually deleted the term cultists from its descriptions of dissociative states, despite earlier versions recognizing trauma caused by captivity of terrorists or cultists. This suppression of language reflects the institutional pressure to deny the organization and ritual nature of this specific trauma.
So we've covered the hidden history, the dark mechanics of programming, and the clinical consensus. Now, let's connect this conspiratorial undercurrent to the modern era. These cults are not historical curiosities. Survivors report their programming has a distinct, modern, and chillingly political agenda.
Yeah, the modern agenda is terrifyingly focused on larger-scale social and political destabilization, fulfilling that Gnostic desire to overthrow the perceived material prison. Survivors reported receiving what they called Armageddon programming. This is training that conditioned certain altars for mass killings, intended to be sacrificial events designed to magically augment the power of evil, sometimes aimed at establishing a new world order or a totalitarian state.
Okay, this moves far beyond simple abuse. We're talking about training for large-scale societal collapse, with clients reporting training in military-style combat, bomb-making, specific target selection, often in remote locations. The goal is to maximize chaos and suffering as a magical sacrifice to achieve their political or spiritual aim.
Yes, and this brings us back to institutional involvement. Our sources cite the alleged existence of government and intelligence-related destructive cults using these sophisticated mind control procedures. The operational goal is usually twofold: intelligence gathering and facilitating secret, deniable operations. This moves beyond small, private groups into the apparatus of the state itself.
And here we find the infamous CIA connection, the shadow government element that connects historical occult knowledge with modern psychological warfare.
We must note the documented covert experimental mind control research. The source specifically mentions Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, a past president of the American Psychiatric Association, who conducted experimental mind control research on unsuspecting psychiatric patients in Canada, funded directly by the CIA.
Detail Cameron's methods. This wasn't subtle therapy, was it?
God, no. Cameron subjected patients to a horrific regimen known as psychic driving, where they were given massive electroshock treatments up to 40 times the standard dose, induced into weeks or months of sleep via drugs, and subjected to continuous, repetitive audio loops of harmful messages. He was attempting to de-pattern the mind, effectively erasing the core personality, leaving a blank slate for new programming. This is state-sponsored, coercive persuasion, a literal experiment in manufacturing controllable human assets.
That is a staggering admission of state-level coercive research on its own citizens, and the U.S. government structure provides the perfect cover, doesn't it?
It highlights the extensive compartmentalization of secrets, what the intelligence world calls sensitive compartmented information, or SCI. This structure allows unethical or illegal activities like mind control research or the organization of destructive cults to occur under the guise of national security, without the knowledge or scrutiny of the general public or even other top-secret officials.
The intelligence community itself is essentially dissociated from the mainstream populace by these secrecy protocols. If the government is capable of creating and funding such research, the difficulty of prosecuting survivors' allegations, which often point high up the chain, becomes almost insurmountable.
And that systemic cover-up is further evidenced in what happens when survivors try to seek justice at the local level. The system doesn't just fail, it actively protects the powerful. We really need to look at the Gilmer case in Texas as a masterclass in institutional obstruction and information suppression.
The Gilmer case, that involved widespread child abuse, ritual abuse allegations, and shocking reports of police and governmental corruption, including kidnapping and murder related to the disappearance of teenager Kelly Wilson. What were the red flags that pointed to institutional interference?
Oh, the flags were enormous and brazen. First, the serious conflict of interest. The editor of the local newspaper, the Gilmer Mirror, was simultaneously serving on the Upshur County grand jury that was hearing the allegations. During her tenure on the jury, she was publishing articles highly critical of the idea that the ritual abuse even exists.
That is a direct breach of justice, isn't it? Allowing the media to shape public opinion and poison the narrative while the editor is sitting in the very room deciding the fate of the accused.
Absolutely. But the most disturbing revelation, which illustrates the level of official corruption, involves the disappearing evidence. On Halloween night, October 31st, 1994, police records and critical evidence related to the Kelly Wilson murder, accumulated by the special prosecutor and his investigative team, mysteriously disappeared from police headquarters.
Wait, a major police station, sensitive files related to murder and government corruption vanish without a trace on Halloween. That reads like intentional staging to mock the victims. What specific evidence vanished?
The sources indicate that these were detailed files, including documentation of the organized, ritualistic aspects of the crime and the ties to influential local figures. The disappearance directly sabotaged the prosecution. And despite the extraordinary nature of the allegations and the magnitude of the victims, the Dallas Morning News reporter covering the case ignored the contamination of the missing files, instead publishing articles that actively downplayed the ritual angle and focused on discrediting the witnesses.
This pattern demonstrates precisely the systemic mechanism of denial. If the crime involves influential people or high-status individuals, the ritual aspects are immediately obscured or ignored by law enforcement and the media, and evidence is made to vanish.
We see this pattern repeatedly, even in the widely reported Matamoros murders, where American student Mark Kilroy was ritually sacrificed by a cult. Police actively withheld evidence of the mutilations and extreme ritual elements from the media, downplaying the cult angle as just drug-related or unrelated to the core crime. The official policy is clear: conceal the ritual elements from the public narrative.
Yeah, the institutional policy forces victims and therapists into a constant battle against the narrative, where they are labeled as hysterical or unscientific, merely for stating what the clinical and forensic evidence strongly suggests: that organized, ritualistic trauma is a mechanism of elite control. This has been a deep and disturbing journey, but the evidence gathered from these clinical narratives and historical records paints a consistent and, well, terrifying picture of a hidden hand operating across centuries. Let's run a rapid-fire summary of the 3 bombshells we've uncovered.
Okay, first, the ancient occult philosophy, Gnosticism, provides the ideological framework by actively promoting the inversion of good and evil. It posits that the biblical serpent is benevolent and the creator God is flawed, fueling Luciferian movements that demand the practitioner experience both profound good and profound evil to achieve their form of twisted enlightenment.
Second, the dark technology of programming techniques, exemplified by phrases like deeper and deeper, conditions victims to respond to seemingly innocuous cues by dissociating. This ensures immediate silence, compliance, and obedience, making ritual abuse a perfect systemic mechanism for exploitation and control by high-status perpetrators.
And third, the empirical data confirms the clinical reality of this abuse. Surveys show that treating professionals overwhelmingly believe SRA allegations, describing extreme, consistent, and organized abuses like cannibalism and baby breeding accounts, too consistent across disparate victims and too horrific in nature to be dismissed as fantasy or simple suggestion.
The knowledge we've unearthed is heavy, yeah. And it changes the way you look at history and the world around you, realizing that the official narrative is often a veneer protecting the darkest secrets of the powerful. But there is one final provocative thought that encapsulates the existential horror of these cult systems.
Right. For the cultist, particularly those who are groomed and rise in rank, the pathway to power and protection is twisted into the ultimate betrayal of self and others. They are taught that rising in rank means shifting from the victim role to the perpetrator role. The only way to stop the harm done to yourself, the only way to escape being the object of ritual trauma, is to inflict it upon others.
That is the ultimate existential twist. The price of survival in the hidden hand system is perpetration.
We have only scratched the surface of these hidden histories. Make sure you subscribe to the official urban.substack.com for the full deep dive, including the sources, footnotes, and continuous analysis that goes beyond what we can cover in a single deep dive.
And thread this up on X with #UrbanOdysseyTruth. Tell us, what evidence resonates most with you? What piece of this dark history demands further investigation? Reply to @officialurbanus. Until next time, keep questioning everything.